Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending today's workshop, which is Back to School. And David and I have been friends for, about 10 years. And we actually met at a Cozen O'Connor presentation where they needed a benefits guy to kind of stand in and answer some questions. And we've done several presentations throughout the years. And so David and I were talking about a month ago, asking the question, what are we going to do with Back to School? And thankfully, we've been able to find three very dynamic, successful women who are also successful moms to contribute as part of this conversation. And so I want to say first and foremost to all of the panelists, thank you so much for being on this call and on leading this webinar. We have Martha Chapman, Ashley Kirchhoff, Kristin Ryan, and David Barron, all accomplished in what they do, and we'll introduce them a little bit later. But what I want to know from the audience is, how many of y'all can use the chat feature? If you all know where it is, if you wouldn't mind, just say hello and tell us where you're from. I think we should give a distance award. Now, my wife is in the other room, and she gets the living room award. But we have Karen from Ohio. Welcome, Karen. I think we had a few people from Washington sign up as well. So tell us where you're from. Megan, you're from Houston. Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Houston.
Chicago.
Ooh, Iowa.
Atlanta.
Awesome. Cool. So we've got almost a national sitting here. We got Houston, Austin. Great. Patty from Los Angeles. She doesn't walk. Nobody walks in LA. Green Bay, Wisconsin, finally. Somebody from Green Bay signed in. Thank you so much, Andrea. Now, what we want to do is we're trying to keep this dialogue open. David sent me a presentation that he's going to walk through, but what I want to know, and what we all want to know, is like, what is the one question, or what are the questions that you want to make sure are answered today? Obviously, with school coming back into session and the threat of this pandemic probably not going away anytime soon, would love to know, like, what are the questions that you would want to have answered as we have this conversation? So if you wouldn't mind, type away real quick. Hey, Jennifer. My former neighbor, Mrs. Robinson, Jennifer's on the phone. She runs a doctor's office locally. So it's great to see you on, Jennifer. Waiting for questions, David. Give you some fodder for conversation.
Well, yeah, as we've talked about, I mean, this is a big issue, because I think in last year, it's pretty clear that schools are either going to be open or closed, and what we're working with now is a lot of different options and different varieties, and I think that's a real tricky issue for employers and HR professionals right now. Okay, so Chelsea's asking the expectation that FFCRA will be extended for employees unable to work from home. How do we best support them in return for school in this environment? Would like to know how to know work from home requests for parents who have school children forced to do remote learning. That might be a lively conversation. How to demonstrate to employees, moms, that our company cares for them and realizes that they are our first priority. Great question. Okay, so definitely a well-rounded base of questions, and I'm assuming we're going to get a lot more in that vein. But clearly, with school being uncertain in terms of across the country, across the state, every school district has within their jurisdiction to do something a little bit differently. I know Fort Bend ISD is going totally virtual. Alvin ISD is doing a combination of, you can come into class or you can do it virtual. It's just up to you. And you have some that are doing a variety of things. And so every employer has to face those demands differently, because they're going to have employees in a variety of districts. And so the question becomes is, how do you prepare yourself to support your employees? Because most importantly, being working parents and working moms, your most important people in your lives are your kids. And so how do you accommodate the work necessity with your demands? And so we have Martha Chapman. She is she's an executive leader within Gagemaker. And she is, I asked everybody when we did our presentation, what makes you different? And Martha's recognized for her ability to act under pressure, competent for recognizing talent, but also all levels within the organization to motivate and harvest skills. And you can see on the bottom of that slide, there's a transformer, Optimus Prime. And the reason I put that there is when you think about how Martha has impacted her business, she started in HR and transformed that by making subtle to very aggressive improvements with everything within that operation and answering the question,
what if. Has been promoted to one of the leaders of her company and has taken that transformational mindset and applied it to her business. And so very, very successful, highly regarded within her company. But one of the things I know that she'll want to talk about is how does she keep human in human resources, and how do you make sure that the employees know that you're there for them, even though you still have to run a business. We have Kristin Ryan with PKF Texas. For all the PKF people on the phone, thanks for joining quickly. She is in charge of the employee plan audit practice and specializing primarily in 401k and pension plans. Expertise in financial statement audits, but also internal controls and process evaluation. One thing I love about Kristin is her focus on her clients. She gets to know her clients inside and out, and more, I guess not more, but just as important is she spends a lot of time getting to know her team that helps her clients be successful. I know she invests a lot of time with her folks just to make sure that her team is consistently growing. And so from that perspective, having that understanding from a management perspective of how to reward your folks, but also accommodate when things happen. That's one of the reasons she's here. And then Ashley gets probably the most brief introduction when it comes to the bio, because she's a sales gal, but highly regarded in her space. What I noted is that third time in a row, she's $1 million producer within Paylocity. And those of you who get calls from payroll people all the time, you know that's probably really hard to do. What I love about her is that most of her business is referral, which that's really hard to do as well. Her kids, while she calls them small, they're actually 95th percentile and very spirited. So Ashley, welcome to the call. And then finally, David Barron, been an attorney for years, specializing in labor and employment, labor relations and disputes, trade secrets, also part of the coronavirus task force. One of the things I love about David is that he prefers not to go to trial. So he wants to offer practical solutions before they end up in litigation. Most recently noted as one of the best attorneys, best lawyers in America. He's a Boy Scout. He loves to run, and he's also loves to hike. So welcome to all four of you.
Thank you.
All right. So do you guys want to, so some of the questions that have come up real quick, specifically regarding the extension of, I'm getting a lot of questions, y'all, FFCRA. David, do you want to address that real quick?
Sure. So FFCRA is only in place until December. So it's a temporary benefit. So basically, for those of you who don't recall, this was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It was one of the, I think it was the first federal piece of legislation that we had in response to COVID, passed back in March, which seems like years ago at this point. And it created the first paid leave benefit. We've never had, you know, family and medical leave is unpaid. So this was the first time we had a federal paid leave benefit. And basically, in a nutshell, it was 2 weeks of paid sick leave for folks who were sick or caring for someone who was sick. And then this new up to 12 weeks of paid FMLA for parents whose kids were, needed to stay home because their kids were out of school because of COVID. And that's the piece that's, of course, the most relevant to our discussion today.
So what's the expectation for an extension?
That's a really good question. Like the PPP, we've heard a lot about those Paycheck Protection Act loans. Those have been extended a couple of times. I would say if the landscape looks the way it does now, with lots of places still having trouble, schools, being closed at the end of the year, I think there's a good chance it will be extended. Yeah.
Any prognostication, David?
Probably will be. One other thing to keep in mind, though, is obviously there's lawsuits that could come, right? I mean, so there's 2-year statute of limitations. So I think, just because you make it past December without a lawsuit doesn't mean you're good. But I think, if cases are still high and we're still struggling with this virus, I think there's a very high likelihood that gets extended.
So I want to ask Martha, Kristin, and Ashley, what are your businesses doing with or without the extension of FFCRA? Could you address how you're handling requests as they come up? Martha.
Sure. So the first thing that we do, obviously, is we take it on a case-by-case basis. Not one employee is going to be the same as another employee. And so we want to listen to this specific situation, what's going on, and how can, like you mentioned earlier, how can we keep the human in human resources? At the end of the day, these are people, we see them every day. They're our partners, they're our friends, they're our family. And so we want to treat them that way. And so we want to see what we can do to have their ability to take care of their families, but still keep their job and not make them feel like their job is going to be on the line because they need to take care of their children. I mean, this is an unprecedented time. I know that we've heard that over and over again, but we need to treat our employees fairly so that the first opportunity they get, they don't run out the door.
So definitely balancing the expectation. And what are the requests looking like? Have you had a lot of questions from your folks so far, because school being right around the corner, but what is your response to them typically? Is that pretty much it? Or?
Yeah, so most of them, especially in our industry, because we're a smaller company and we're in manufacturing, the majority of the requests that are coming in are mainly for intermittent leave. And early on, we opened that up and we did not make it mandatory for it using blocked scheduling because it's beneficial for them and it's beneficial for us for them to come back to work as soon as possible and when they can. Making them use it in block times doesn't benefit them and it doesn't benefit us as well.
Yeah, and I just want to add a piggyback on that real quick, Mike. The issue of intermittent leave is a real tricky one, and it's a really important one because most companies that have been dealing with FMLA, just the traditional types of FMLA, understand and know that the intermittent leave is typically, required. DOL and their regulations said for FFCRA leave, actually it's not required. It's subject to agreement between the employer and the employee, which is a little bit different. Why that's important is we had the first case, a lawsuit out of New York. We had a decision this week where a New York judge said that it actually struck down several portions of the regulations, and that was one of them. So I think what Martha is saying is the right approach, which is to be very flexible and to allow intermittent leave, unless you've got a really good reason to treat FFCRA folks different, because that's a piece of that those regulations that I think might not hold up, and at least it hasn't passed muster with the first court that's looked at it. So if you normally would be flexible on allowing intermittent leave for other FMLA reasons, I think it's going to be really hard to treat folks who need time off for FFCRA reasons to take care of children who are out of school, to not allow intermittent leave in those cases.
Fair enough. Kristin Ryan, anything to add to that?
I think it's similar to what Martha said. For us, we fortunately haven't had to furlough anyone or had anyone request it yet, just because of the nature of what we do in professional services. We can do our work from home. So all of our people are still getting paid doing their work from home, which is great, whether kids are going back to school, in person or not. But I think we would, we'll take the same approach if it comes to that. I'm just real fortunate to be with a firm that is not pressuring me to get back to the office for any reason. We can do our work remotely, and our clients have been going through the same things we're going through. And so our focus has been on them and how we can continue to serve them effectively remote.
And then Ashley, given that you're in the sales world or new business world, you get to see this from multiple perspectives. One, as having to be flexible with your own kids. But what do you see generally in terms of being somewhat supportive in these trying times? You might get somebody say, hey, I need to meet with you between 10 and 12, but how do you work with that flexibility?
Yeah, absolutely. What I've noticed is, everybody's going through this right now. Myself, clients, prospective clients, partners I'm working with, and we've just all been giving each other grace and flexibility in this, and just being really forward with folks. Like you said, if you can only meet between 10 and 12, that might not be the best time for me because my 2-year-old might want to go outside at that time or might have to make lunch. So I've just been very forward with people on what times I can meet, and people have been really gracious with it. They understand. Nap time is usually the best time for me to meet with folks. So that's usually when I do meet with people, is between 12 and 2. And if they absolutely have to meet at a certain time, I just warn them there's probably going to be a 2-year-old dressed up like Spider-Man or Hulk or something on my shoulder. So
Nothing wrong with that.
and that's fun too. Whatever.
Getting the Hulk out. And David, we're getting a lot of questions just about can you tell us the basics of FFCRA? Have we seen an increase in lawsuits? How does an employee apply for it? So would you mind, I know you have a presentation and there's some pieces of that might be pretty helpful. Would you mind sharing that real quick and just walking through it?
Sure. Yeah, let me, hopefully everybody can see that now.
Yep.
Okay. So we can just walk through real quickly. Let me find that spot. Yeah, the FFCRA is really the heart of this, because I think that there's two questions. One is, what do you have to do as an organization? And then there's what should you do, right? I mean, those are two very big and somewhat different questions. And so here is the basics of the FFCRA. And this is from a poster that the DOL has put out. You should probably have that in your workplace already. FFCRA is for employers under 500. So that's somewhat of a unique situation. Typically statutes exempt smaller companies, and this one does have an exemption for under 50 as well, which we can talk about. But it also exempts larger businesses. So, the very large corporations are not required to follow this. I think the thought process there was that they're already financially in a position to offer these types of benefits, and many do, but not necessarily. But so these are the 6 areas where employers are required now to provide paid time off. The benefit to the employer is that you get a tax credit. So it's, you have to pay out the leave to the employee, but theoretically that's at a 0 cost to the employer. And the reason why that's really important is that, my advice has been consistently since this law was passed, that if it's a close call, the tie goes to the employee, because you're going to get to take a tax credit versus a risk of a lawsuit. So now you're spending money defending a lawsuit. And if you have to pay out a settlement, you're not going to get a tax credit for that. So, given that choice, I think, my recommendation would always be, again, sort of tie goes to the employee. The big one for our conversation today is item number 5. And that's caring for a child whose school or place of care is closed due to COVID-related reasons. Trying to unpack that gets a little bit tricky. And what we were talking about earlier is, when Congress passed this law, we were really dealing with schools being closed. And that was the thought process behind it. Now we have schools that are partly open, some days live, some days from home. We have schools that are giving parents choices. So, you can choose to send your kid to school, or you can choose to have them stay home and do virtual or distance learning, which raises real questions about whether those types of scenarios are eligible for this leave, which again is up to 12 weeks of paid time off. So that's a real tricky issue that I think we can dive into if you want. There are IRS regulations as to what requirements you can have for employees to qualify. Effectively, they have to, jump through some hoops and provide the information to justify their time off. One important thing to note is in these regulations, if the child is 14 or older, there is a heightened expectation that the parent would have to show special circumstances like special needs and those types of things. So the idea being, again, that a high schooler, should really be able to take care of themselves, and the parent shouldn't have to stay home for that. So again, it's 500 employees or less. FFCRA provides up to 12 weeks of paid time off. There is an exception for employers with 50 or fewer employees if providing that time off would be a financial hardship or just jeopardize the business. Typically that's a financial issue, or maybe the person is in a critical job where you can't really afford to be without that person for 12 weeks. Unlike normal FMLA that has a year tenure requirement, this only has 30 days. So much faster eligibility for new employees. As we've talked about earlier, this law started in April and is scheduled to end in December. So really the fall semester, unless it's extended, will be the last time this leave will be available. I saw a question in the chat about the pay and what the caps are. You can see there in the slides what the caps are. It's $200 a day, not to exceed $10,000. And again, you get a tax credit for that. So you pay the employee, then you turn around and you take a credit against your FICA taxes. So it's not income taxes. I'm not a tax lawyer. I think we actually have a CPA somewhere. Folks is a CPA, but it's not against your income taxes. This is against your quarterly FICA taxes. So this is almost an immediate benefit to to the employer.
David, we're getting some questions as well. So
yeah, sure.
How does an employee apply for the act? Is it 30 working days or 30 days? Speak on the issues of schools being open, but parents having to choose whether to send to school or not. It's probably a separate question, but just some of the blocking and tackling. You addressed pay, 12 weeks paid, and what percentage you address that. But in terms of work, is it working days or 30 calendar days?
It's calendar days. And the other issue is going to be, again, we talked about with schools being open, but parents perhaps choosing to school from home. I was hoping that DOL would have some guidance for us on that. DOL the Department of Labor has some really good FAQs on their website that I think have been very helpful. We don't have an answer to that question yet. What I'm telling clients is, again, going back to the intent of the law, if the school is closed to that child for whatever reason, maybe it's health issues, the parent's concerned, the school is allowing that student to be at home, it's up to the school, then I think they would qualify. I think you have to distinguish that from a parent that chooses, for example, to homeschool. Well, so in that situation, I think that's different. But if the school is providing that as an option officially, then I think they probably would qualify for FFCRA.
Well, and I think the question might come, and this would be a question of what's the legal answer, and then what's the business answer? Because this question is I think what the question is if parents if they have a choice, what's your obligation as an employer to accommodate? And then as a business, this would be a question for Martha, Kristin, and Ashley. It's like, what if somebody just is scared to send their kid back to school, but how do you sort through that to be accommodating, but still accommodate your needs as a business?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And how I've said this, and I think I've said it to you guys, how companies treat their employees during this time is going to be the primary measuring stick, how most employees measure their employers. I mean, we haven't seen anything like this in our lifetime. So memories will be long. These things will stand out. And I think, employers who treat their employees poorly, even if they could legally, will have issues, morale issues, union issues, all sorts of things. So I think there's the legal answer, and then there's the what is the right thing to do. I will say on this question, we really don't have guidance specifically on what to do if the school is technically not closed and whether FFCRA applies. I think the right answer is to be flexible. And again, do you really want to face a lawsuit on that? Do you really want to have 12 people from the jury who's had to wrestle with these issues? I think you're going to get a tax credit. Tie goes to the employee.
Understood. I want to ask a question to Kristin first, because she can have a team-based approach, and they probably have a little bit more flexibility because of what she does. And so in that case where an employee is just afraid to send our teammate is afraid to send their kids to school because of the fear of catching corona, what is your response to that, Kristin? And how do you choose if it's an appropriate determination or not?
Yeah, I think like you said, and like I touched on earlier, because of the work that we do, we can do that from wherever we need to. So I don't see that being too much of an issue for our workforce. I think we're going to be very flexible with employees on what their needs are. We do also have a ton of PTO, so we have that luxury as well. We get 4 to 6 weeks. So I mean, that's an option too. Like I said, we haven't had anybody apply for this yet, but I don't think that we would. I think we would side with the employee and be fair in terms of what their needs were, and definitely support them working from home if they weren't comfortable sending kids to school.
Okay, well, Martha, let me ask you, because you guys make stuff for a living and you have businesses that count on you to complete a production of something. And so you
Correct.
might have a harder time deciding, is this an appropriate leave? And so how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify one thing. For the FFCRA, in order for you to qualify for it, you have to be able to not work from home and do this. So if you qualify to work from home, you don't even qualify for this. So having said that, with our population, we manufacture parts specifically, or actually tools for gauging and quality equipment for the oil field. So we're a manufacturer, but we're directly tied to oil and gas as well. So like you said, we're an assembly line. We produce things. We're a machine shop. So if we're shut down and we're not able to run a certain part of the assembly line, that affects the whole company. So as we mentioned earlier, or yesterday when we were speaking, we have been slow due to the coronavirus and then just the general business industry, but also oil and gas has been slow. So given that climate, we're able to be a little more flexible right now, having to do that. So if we can, and as long as it's not detrimental to our business, we will err on the side of caution and we will be more flexible with our employees. We're not going to force them to come in if they have a situation where they have to teach their children at home or they have to be home for a certain reason. We will err on the side of caution.
Awesome. Thank you. So I guess that's the thing the answer there is there hasn't been a lot of direction from the government, but then you have to err on the side of what's right for your people. And from a perspective of your culture, that's what you're going to do. David, we're getting some other questions about FFCRA versus unemployment, and we can choose online learning. So I'm not really sure how to respond to that question though, but.
Yeah, what's the question?
Oh, it just says, Julia says FFCRA versus unemployment.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts there. Many of the same reasons why employees would be eligible for FFCRA are also similar to the reasons why they would be eligible for unemployment. So, and in fact, many employees probably would prefer to be on unemployment at least through the end of July when they had the $600 boost. So, we've seen a number of employees that have just not pursued FFCRA at all, or if they've been furloughed, they choose to stay on furlough in some cases. So I think that's, with unemployment boost going away, or at least we haven't seen what the compromise bill is going to look like. It's hard to say whether people are going to be better or worse on unemployment versus FFCRA, but I think that continues to be an issue with employees trying to pick and choose what benefits them the most.
And then a question from Heidi is a clarification on whether an employee works from home or not. Can you talk about the eligibility?
I'll add, and then Martha can add in. So to be eligible for FFCRA, they have to be not able to work from either at home or at work. I mean, if they can work from home, they're continued to be paid normally. They're just working at a different place. You could have a situation where an employee, even though they're working from home, still needs time off, especially intermittently, if maybe they have young children that they have to supervise, 2 days a week because they're doing distance learning from home 2 days a week. So you could still have situations where an employee who is working, the mere fact that you're allowing them to work from home doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And so that employee would still need perhaps to take some FFCRA leave. And again, that's where you get into these hybrid situations where maybe they can do their normal job from home on certain days, but there may be certain days where they can't, and they might need FFCRA for those days.
Okay. And then David, from the bulk of your from your presentation, what other key points that we want to make sure that we make and follow along?
I guess we'll continue with a couple of things here. We've talked about intermittent leave, I think, pretty thoroughly, so I don't want to beat that horse too much. One other issue that comes up is if you have like two employees, parents that are working for you, or perhaps that the other parent is working from home, again, this wouldn't apply if there is another parent in the home. So it's truly a test of whether that employee is needed in the home to take care of the child. So if there is another option, that's something that potentially would disqualify the employee from taking the leave. What makes it tricky is, how many questions you can ask, and you don't want to go to the point of interfering with their leave. And the more aggressive you are, the more likely that employee would be unhappy. And I think you go to the morale issues that we've been talking about versus just being accommodating. We've talked about this question of whether the school is closed. Again, I think that's a big one. And I hope DOL will provide some guidance on that. I think for the time being, I think the safe thing to do is just to be flexible in that area. Homeschooling, to me, is where I think from a legal perspective, you draw the line. I think, again, you can come up with some arrangement for employees who on a temporary basis need to homeschool, and I think flexibility is great. Legally, I don't think that an employer has an obligation to, under the FFCRA at least, to pay for a parent who chooses to pull their child out of school, for example, and homeschool. That I think would not be addressed in the law as it currently stands. And I know that's also a very common thing that we're seeing is pods and all sorts of arrangements where parents are pooling together, to teach. So I think that's probably the high points there. And maybe we can talk now about what to do if employees have exhausted all of their FMLA leave. And I think maybe that's a good place to bring some of the other speakers in as well, because that's where I think you get into more the non-traditional types of options. Of certainly working from home is one, but literally changing people's pay, changing people's jobs, unpaid leaves of absence, right? I mean, all the different things that maybe could come into play for someone who doesn't have FFCRA.
So I'm going to ask Martha first. How are you accommodating that? And do you have anybody that's kind of exhausted at this point?
Yes, we have. And so it started obviously at the spring time of last year. And obviously we've gone through the summertime, and now we're about to start school again. So we have had people already exhausted. And again, we're handling on a case-by-case basis. If an employee comes with a situation and they're letting us know, and again, we have a smaller population. I know every single one of our employees. I know their families. I know their children's names. And so I know the situation that's going on. And so if we know that, hey, this person needs to be out and they've exhausted their 2 weeks and they're not necessarily going to go into the expanded FMLA, again, there's going to be some leniency in there as long as we have a business need for them not to have to be here, meaning if we can have somebody put into their position temporarily to cover them for a couple of days to get them situated with their children, then we will definitely do that. We're not going to draw the line at 2 weeks. I'm sorry, you're terminated after that. That is not what we're doing.
In terms of a business need, and David, any concerns in terms of making a decision that could, I don't want to say discriminatory, but any issues that you might want to offer to the audience about how you do that? If you're trying to do the right thing as a business, how do you keep yourself from getting in trouble?
Yeah, and I think discrimination concerns is a important one, because what you do for one person is setting a precedent. So,
right.
You couldn't allow, for example, a male employee or a female employee to be treated differently. That would not. There may be business reasons for that, but that those employees may not see those business reasons, and they may only see, Bob got treated differently than Sally, and so I think you have to be really careful. I think certainly treating people on a case-by-case basis is the fair thing to do, but there really needs to be some overarching principles, I think, that the company has, in terms of how to handle these issues. And, one of my big fears, and one of the things I know that clients are going to be wrestling with for a long time after all this is over, is all of the precedents that we're setting. And, many of my clients wrestled a long time with employees wanting to work from home and fighting that and saying no. And, now with this, coronavirus situation with so many people working from home, it's going to be really hard to take that back at some point, right? If a company decides, well, we really think we need to get people back working in the office, if someone says, well, I have a medical issue and I want as a reasonable accommodation to work from home, we've all proven that they can do it. So it's going to be hard to make the case that that's an undue hardship going forward. So there's things like that I think, maybe the genie's out of the bottle already, but just thinking about what precedent are we setting and how are we, are we okay with setting that precedent? Are we going to try to put that genie back in the bottle when this is all over? And if so, how do we do that?
Well, I think what's interesting is, so when I first started, I worked for, when I was working for a company called Arthur Anderson, not wearing a tie was considered business casual, and working from home would have been a foreign concept completely, where now working from anywhere, it may be an expectation of a future benefit, or just not even a benefit. It's just as an expectation for certain workforces. So you're absolutely right. This is, I hate to say the word new normal because it just feels normal now. But certainly a point to ask is how and can you put it back in the bottle? And I think that's really a question that each employer is going to have to figure out from a cultural perspective. Does it make sense for you to have all of your folks in one location? Because you're going to have those total rewards, the total comp elements, and that's going to be a part of it. So we are getting some more questions. So Josie has asked a question. It's hard to really set some guidelines since we've not had to face anything like this before. And so Martha and Kristin, how did you guys attack this from a business to say, okay, we've never done anything like this before either, but what was it that helped you get to the decision of saying we're going to face our culture, our values first? Does that make sense? So
Kristin, do you want to go first?
And maybe that wasn't a question.
I was just following the normal progression of you going first. That's fine. I think the key for us is we had such strong technology and policies in place that allowed us to work effectively remotely. So we just kind of eased into that. And it's been a challenge, certainly, for some of our team members that were used to being in the office every day or used to being at clients' offices every day, frankly. But I think the transition was pretty smooth for us overall. I know for me and a lot of the people that I talk to in our leadership, we're hoping that it changes some people's mindsets on how work gets done, because a lot of us have shown that, we can get everything done and more, actually. And I know those of us that have children, especially young children at home, and my husband usually has a very strict, 8 to 5 schedule. It has to be downtown. And with both of us going to Galleria area and downtown every day, and it's been a real strain. And I know I've had some eye-opening moments of, how my life's changed, how my health has changed, things like that. I'm just having that flexibility. Not that we weren't always flexible, because we were, but this is just an added element. Ashley was talking about it yesterday when we were prepping for the call. Just not having to drive, an hour or an hour and a half to meet someone is a huge time saver. So we're hoping that, some of this does stick when we kind of get back to our previous normal.
Nice way to say it.
And with us, it's a little bit different just because of the type of environment that we are in, because we are in manufacturing and we do have a lot of people that physically have to be here and cannot work outside of the office. And a lot of our work is dependent on somebody else. For instance, my big role of mine is obviously human resources and HR. And so my customers, quote, are my employees. If my employees are here, even though I can physically do my job from home, if my employees are here, then I need to be here. So I think it all depends on the type of industry and environment that you're in. And yes, things are changing and there are more flexible, but a lot of it does have to do and is dependent on the industry.
Martha, what I would ask, just in terms of how long I've got to know you, it's like your company seems like it has a very strong culture and you use your core values to drive your decisions. And so was this kind of an obvious choice for you, faced with the uncertainty of not knowing the legal clarification, but the answer of what do we do as a business?
Yes, and I think we kind of had to evolve really fast early on. So again, we are directly tied to oil and gas, which is an energy. So we never closed. We were open the entire time. And so we had to make a conscious effort of how we were going to manage through this. And we learned as we went along. But what we did learn is that you can't be as stringent and as strict as we were prior to this. This is definitely something new we've never really dealt with a smaller population with us, and specifically we have a long tenured population. We wanted to make sure and maintain that talent and that skill set that we had. And so we had to adjust as we went along. And it's been a learning game. It has not been easy, and there's no just silver bullet that says do this and it'll work. There isn't, and there's trial and error as well.
Understand, but thank you for that. What did you guys learn as a company that was unexpected but was a blessing? And then what did you learn that the challenges that you're still trying to overcome?
I'm going to think on that if one of the other panelists wants to speak.
Well, I'll ask Ashley, because Ashley, you have such a dynamic space. Going through this, what have you learned as an individual, as a mom, and as a company that has just been a blessing to you? And what are some things that are a hindrance because of some of the limitations that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel very fortunate to be with Paylocity, with the leadership that we have throughout the pandemic. It's honestly just made me appreciate the company more with their flexibility. Seen a lot of other companies and competitors doing layoffs or just not being flexible with their employees. So our CEO, Steve Beauchamp, right from the beginning started sending out weekly messages on how he was going to make sure that he was going to remain flexible, and we were going to do anything we could to make sure that working parents were going to be supported and family comes first, in every scenario. So that was very, very appreciated. In my role, I've always worked from home, so it wasn't a huge difference for me, but obviously having a 2- and 6-year-old at home was not something I was used to. So what I learned in that time was I just became I realized that my time was very precious on what I could spend with my kids and what I needed to spend on work. So like Kristin was saying earlier, a lot of my days were, driving an hour here or there, or dropping in somewhere, or just, really being able to do anything that I wanted whenever I wanted to do with my 8 hours at work. And having to do it from home with children completely changed how my day went. It became, I could work in spurts. So, back then my son was in virtual kindergarten. So there was an hour every day where we had to be on a Zoom call. So obviously couldn't work then. Having a 2-year-old, there's a lot of different things that happen throughout the day between diaper changes, snacks, I want to go play outside. So obviously, I've got to do that stuff first. So when I have 15, 20 minutes, an hour, I have got to get to work. I've got to do the most essential things at that point. So it made me realize you have to do the most important things in those few precious moments you have them. And just very thankful that I have the flexibility to be able to do that with Paylocity. So it definitely improved my time management.
Yeah, I would say one of the cons for me is I love to meet with people, and seeing them 2-dimensional is not necessarily as engaging as seeing people 3-dimensionally. So definitely been a struggle, but technology has been a wonderful thing for all of us. And speaking of that, y'all may know I produce a podcast. It's called Solving Healthcare. And I talked to a lady a couple of weeks ago. She came to me, but the name of her business is Babysitters Incorporated. And so essentially she, kind of think of it kind of like an Uber for babysitting, right? Where she's a licensed daycare provider in New York, and can come to a company and say, hey, look, I can find you people that are experts in daycare, and you can either start like a virtual one or maybe use it to expand to classrooms. And we've had a couple of questions asking about something like that, or if you wanted to provide a classroom for employees or set up a pod in the building next door where you can bring kids and kind of facilitate a virtual learning environment. There's going to be some risks with that. So David, do you want to talk for a little bit about what that could mean to an employer from a liability perspective?
Sure. I think if you would have asked most employers before COVID whether they had any interest in doing that, they probably would have all said no, with the exception of maybe like, nursery for smaller children, which I know some large corporate campuses, that is a service that they provide. The risks are really two big areas. One is, of course, injury liability, right? So you would want some sort of waiver. It depends on your environment, depends on how dangerous that is. Do you have a good safe space for something like that to happen, or to be used for that purpose? So I think you want to have your arms wrapped around the liability issues if there's an injury or someone gets hurt, because again, it's not workers' comp. This is not an employee. So if a child is injured, theoretically, they would have the ability to sue. The other issue is the working time aspect of an employee who may need to go handle an issue with their child in the workplace, and then how do you compensate for that, right? Do they have to like clock out, go deal with their child issue, and then come back and clock in, and the risk that somehow doesn't get handled appropriately, and so you have compensation issues. I think those are manageable issues, and I know employers have been looking pretty hard at exploring options, in this area. And again, we're in a totally new world, and I think there's opportunities there. Most companies, I would say, would probably try to outsource that, to have, as you said, one of those third parties come in and take on those types of responsibilities, because most employers just don't have the staff or the ability to do that, or the desire to do that.
And in terms of like some type of legal document or release, or what would you suggest a business consider reviewing or establishing? Obviously, how do you clock people in and out? That will have to be addressed. But in terms of some of the disclosures or documents you'd want an employee to sign, you got any feedback or comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you would want to have some very clear policies and waivers of liability. That again, the employer is not providing childcare. They would be a third party. That if there's an injury, that the employer wouldn't be responsible for that. Again, this is not something that most employers have done. So again, we're somewhat in uncharted waters.
Okay. So Martha, coming back to you, what were the blessings that you learned from this, and the things that you wish that you could fix?
Yes, I think part of the reason why I take the stance, and I did it early on, but it reiterated based on a personal experience of mine. So back in June, as we mentioned earlier in our prep call, my son is special needs, and so he attends therapy full time. And so during June, he was exposed to his therapist who tested positive, and that automatically put a hamper on our entire family. We were quarantined for 2 weeks, and both my husband and I had to work. And so one of the things that I learned is, number one, without the help of a spouse helping, and you do have single family situations, and so you have to be able to give grace. It's hard enough with two parents and children. When you have a single family situation, it's almost impossible. And so that I think is, to me, the driving force of why I feel it's so important to be flexible with families, because I've lived it. Both, again, my husband and I, of course, we have a little bit different situation with my son being special needs and not a traditional toddler or neurotypical child. And so he has additional and special needs that other children don't. But having been through that and knowing that other parents could be in that same situation is why I take the stance of, you want to be as flexible as possible, and give as much grace as you can, so that your employees stay with you and respect you after all this is said and done.
Just to follow up real quickly on that, Mike, is something that I want to make sure we mention is everybody's focused on planning for school. There are going to be unplanned issues that arise when schools open. There are going to be classrooms where a child tests positive or a teacher tests positive.
Yep. And
because we've all been wrestling with this in the workplace, where an employee tests positive and then you have to contact trace and people have to quarantine for 14 days. We're going to see that on a much wider scale once schools open, because if a child in that classroom tests positive, probably the whole classroom is going to have to be self-quarantining for 14 days. So there are going to be parents who have that happen to their child, and it's going to create havoc. So I think, let's all be prepared that once school starts, imagine that, times 100 and 1,000, because it's going to be happening in every school probably. And we'll work through it just like workplaces are working through it. But it's going to be stressful, and it's going to be a lot of unplanned issues that come up because of it.
Got it. Understood. I guess another area would be, we had talked about it a little earlier, but it's moving to the work from anywhere environment. And certainly that creates liability when it comes to cyber liability and those type of things. And so David, can you talk a little bit about how much of an issue that is and what you would recommend?
Yeah, so, again, with the increased flexibility, we have companies doing things that really they haven't done before, and there may be some hidden traps there. Just a couple of them that come to mind. One would be making sure that if you have employees who are working from home in different states, your employees may have scattered to the wind, and some states have very specific rules on things like unemployment insurance, taxation, workers' comp. So you may be thinking you're paying all those things for employees that are in Texas, and your employees may actually be working somewhere else, and you may have liabilities there. So that's one thing to make sure you have your arms wrapped around. Also, things like trade secrets and confidential information. If an employee is working from home for 6 months, do they have a stack of your critical documents sitting at their kitchen table? And how do you get that back if they leave? How do you protect those things? I'm very afraid that we're going to have cases where you're trying to enforce a non-compete or some sort of agreement after this is all over, and the employee is going to say, well, this stuff's not really confidential because they let everybody have it in their house and send it around, and I emailed it to myself to print it out. So security, cybersecurity, trade secrets, don't lose sight of those things. And then lastly, just again, wage and hour. It's such a big issue, making sure that you probably have really good policies surrounding those things in the workplace, but now you're in a different environment. Making sure, for example, if you're in a state where employees are required to get breaks, they need to get their breaks even if they're working from home. So just watch those things.
Well, and I've heard a common theme with everybody's response is like, look, this is all new stuff, but let's simplify it into a process of saying, okay, what is the problem? This is a new normal, but what are the possibilities? So answer the question, what if? Use your culture and your guiding principles to help make decisions, but at the end of the day, it's still about people and about keeping your business working, understanding that there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens. It's going to be a surprise, and we're all working through it. And I think if you take that approach, legally you could be required to do one thing, but you still have to answer the question, what's right for your business? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Now, I would ask Kristin, what do you recommend folks that for people that just work from state to state to state, how do you accommodate that? But that could be a webinar in its own right. And so we're wrapping up on time, and I want to ask to see if there's any other questions that have not been answered. But while I'm doing that, I want to go around the webinar room and just get some final thoughts from you all. How are you approaching the school year personally and professionally? And what advice do you have for the audience that's listening? So let's start with Ashley.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, we have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. The 6-year-old will be going into 1st grade. And we just opted to do virtual learning for the first semester. So Sci-Fair ISD is allowing us to pick semester to semester how we'd like to do either virtual or in person. And we've decided to go virtual. Our daycare is going to be offering help with that. So the thought was, well, 2-year-old's already there. Might as well send my 1st grader there and just see how things go. And like Martha said, just trying to give myself grace. We had an instance where the daycare had a couple COVID cases and had to close. So it was, okay, coming back home. And I think they were only in for 2 weeks at that point anyway. So trying to be very flexible, give myself grace. And it doesn't seem like there's a great option either way right now. So just trying to do the best we can.
Kristin, how about you?
Yeah, and I know everyone hates me for this, but our school is letting our kids go back in person on the 24th, and we're one of the only ones I've heard of in our area. And we've chosen to do that. It's a very personal decision for everyone, but we both work, and we went through the virtual learning stuff in the spring, and it was very challenging for both of us. We had to do shifts, teaching different subjects, and then getting to work at some point, midday. And so it just took a toll. And, not to the extent that Martha deals with, but all three of ours, we have triplets that are almost 9, and all three of them struggle with mental and learning delays. And so, them not receiving that through the school has been difficult, especially with things like dyslexia that we're just not qualified to address. So we're anxious for them to get back, even with the risk, we're anxious for them to get back to not only that, but, getting what they need from a learning perspective, but also socially. They have each other, thankfully, and that's kept us sane, more so than people that have one child at home fending for themselves. So they have each other to play with, but being around, being in the social environment, I think is really going to help. And, I didn't get to speak earlier to this, so I'll just say quickly, I'm really hopeful that everyone will see through this, that we can work differently than we did before. And I already touched on this, but personally for me, it's been a huge advantage to be able to have both my husband and I home, and not having that commute every day, and being able to, have more flexibility with our time and manage everything that we have on our plates. And I know that I've been doing this for a number of years, so it comes easily to me, and I'm very focus on work when I'm at home, and I know everybody doesn't operate that way. So we've definitely had some challenges with, especially some of our younger folks who are trying to work without supervision, having that self-discipline to get the work done. But I think for most of us, we've been able to do that and demonstrate that, and we're planning to go back to the office with that mindset that we may be able to have a Teams meeting, and not everybody has to be, in the same place at the same time. So that's what I've learned in a nutshell, of what I'm looking forward to this semester.
So David or Martha, flip a coin.
Ladies first.
All right. So touching back on something that Kristin said, is she started out by saying some of y'all might be upset with me. And I think we need to stop that stigma. Every family is different, and every family has their reasons for making a personal decision, and let's not politicize it. Let's not judge people for their decision, and let's support people in their decisions. We're all in this together, and people make different decisions based on their family needs. Because I have a special needs son, we have to be overly cautious and make decisions that the family next to us may not have to do. But that's our decision, and that's their decision, and we need to be respectful of one another. Especially in the workplace, be very cautious about the things that we talk about, not to offend other people, and just be respectful, more so than anything. Again, because of my son's special needs, we are choosing to keep my 9-year-old daughter, home as long as possible. But that also means that I have that ability because my husband stays home and is able to do that. And he's a super dad and is able to handle taking my son to therapy and teaching. But again, not everybody has that luxury. And so the main thing I want the takeaway is to be respectful and be not judgmental when it comes to another person. You have no idea what's going on in their lives.
Well said. Thank you, Martha.
Guess I'll close this out here. I agree with everything that the other panelists have said, and we can talk about what the law requires, but at the end of the day, an employer that is kind and tries to do the right thing is always going to be judged better than one who does not. And I think we're in a very unique situation here where I think most employers are really trying to do the right things, and that goes a long way. You want to make sure you do the lawful thing for sure and get it right. But again, trying to do right by your employees is really the long-term strategy that's going to be most successful. I just totally agree with that.
Well, to the four of you, sorry, counting myself on that one, but to the four of you all, thank you. I can't thank you enough for your time. And for those that have attended, we'll do a recording of this. And David, do you mind if we send out a copy of the presentation?
Of course not.
Okay, we'll send a link to that as well. Y'all, thank you so much. We're only slated for an hour, but I'm sure that the questions and comments keep coming in. But I thank you sincerely for your time, for everything that you do, and for just reminding us that, you know, as human beings, our commitment really needs to be to doing what's right and to being there for each other, understanding we all have to thrive in our own way. But at the end of the day, we must be respectful. We must be willing to accommodate, but also try to put ourselves in the shoes of other people. So I'm grateful for the lessons that you've all taught me today. And it's really just a reminder that we need to be human. So thank you.